Francisco has never been more pleased with his purchase. A house with 6 bedrooms, a steam room, and a spacious garage, what could be better? There's also an attic, which can be transformed into another room. A real dream. The seller of the house also seemed to Francisco to be a reliable person. Paul immediately said he almost didn't live here, because he initially planned to come here only for vacation but to live in his apartment downtown. I've only come here about 10 times. I bought this house 3 or 4 years ago, I don't remember exactly. I need to check it in the papers. Why are you selling it? What's wrong with this house? Francisco asked cautiously. The seller thought for a moment, as if trying to find the right words, and then said, "This house is a little strange. Don't think anything bad. I'm not trying to scare you. I just don't feel comfortable here. I have a weird feeling that someone else is living here besides me. But the price is very attractive. So there are 3 other potential buyers besides you. Think fast." Francisco nodded and hurried to change the subject of the conversation. He didn't want to lose the opportunity to buy such a good house, especially since he had spent about half a year looking for a house like this. "I'll buy it. I'm fine with everything. I'm not a superstitious person, so it'll be fine." Paul shrugged, then called the notary and arranged a meeting. And in a few hours, Francisco was already the happy owner of a good house, which he had dreamed of for so many years. Finally, now I can say goodbye to the rented apartment and live in my own house, Francisco whispered. Unfortunately, there was no one to share the joy with. 3 years ago his wife Lily died in a car accident. The road does not forgive mistakes. She was an experienced and careful driver, so it was even harder to believe what had happened. On the day of his wife's death, Francisco was at the hospital, performing surgery. The nurse decided not to inform him immediately but waited until the surgery was over. Died. It's simply impossible. She drives carefully. She's a very experienced driver, Francisco said in a state of shock. The nurse wrinkled her nose for a moment and then added, "The accident was caused not by your wife, but by a drunk driver. He drove into the oncoming lane. They say there was no chance she could have survived." Tears streamed from Francisco's eyes. He was one of the best surgeons in the hospital, with a flawless reputation. He was a decent man, but why was fate so cruel to him? The next 3 years were an ordeal for him. In order to survive the depression and pain, he worked hard and was ready to perform surgery for patients with even the most severe diseases. He tried to save as many people as possible. Eventually, this paid off, and Francisco began to slowly recover. But now, when he finally purchased a house, things would be much better. There will always be plenty of work to do in his house, and it will distract him from his sad thoughts. Although Francisco was a surgeon, so he always took care of his hands and tried not to work too hard at home. At first, the house he had bought pleased him very much. Sometimes it seemed to him that it was built by someone who knew about all his personal preferences. But then the man began to notice that food began to disappear from the refrigerator from time to time. But not too much. If Francisco didn't live alone, he wouldn't even notice it. "Maybe it's mice or rats," his co-worker Barry said. "Absolutely not. I believe it if it was a pantry, but a refrigerator. No way." "Do you think rats have learned how to open a refrigerator?" Francisco said. But the surgeon was not only concerned about the food. Sometimes it seemed to him that he could hear someone's muffled footsteps at night. But when Francisco got up and turned on the light, there was no one in the house. "I don't think that I'm going crazy. Something is really going on in this house. Although it could be a good horror movie. The surgeon widower is losing his mind in his new house." Francisco laughed. Meanwhile, the oddities continued. Sometimes, when Francisco came home from work, he found slightly noticeable drops of water in the shower. It doesn't seem that weird. But in the evening he cleaned the shower stall. It was sparkling, and there were no water droplets on it. And he didn't take a shower in the morning. Moreover, the bathroom was wet and warm, as if someone had showered about an hour ago. One day, While discussing his problem with another surgeon, he entered the room to check on the patients. The patients loved Francisco and looked forward to seeing him. Everyone wanted to know how their treatment was going and whether they would be discharged soon. One of the patients heard their conversation and suddenly suggested a good idea. Francisco, why don't you install security cameras in the house? Francisco raised an eyebrow in surprise. But where would I get those cameras? The patient smiled. I own an electronic goods store. Here, take a business card, the address is on it. When you get there, tell the store employees your name. They will help you choose the best option and give you a very good discount. If necessary, they'll even install it themselves. Francisco thought about it. The idea was really good. That way he can keep an eye on the house anytime, no matter where he is. I think I'll definitely stop by your store the other day. But for now, get ready for the examination. The second surgeon smiled. He was glad his colleague had made the right choice. Francisco didn't wait too long to purchase the cameras and bought everything he needed the very next day. He refused the installation offered by the store employees and did it himself. It wasn't difficult to do that. Francisco even joked that if he was fired from the hospital, he would make money installing security cameras. Well, now let's see what kind of ghost lives in my house. For the first couple of days, there was nothing unusual. The videos showed empty rooms, or Francisco wearing his pajamas. It seems that there was no mysterious visitor. I guess I worked too much lately. I'm just exhausted. That's why I began to notice these oddities. Looks like I need a vacation, not cameras, Francisco thought. But what he saw the next day shocked him. It all started when an elderly woman entered the house from the back door. Francisco knew that there was a door that looked like it had not been used for ages. The stranger walked cautiously, looking around and trying not to make any noise. It's like she senses the cameras are watching her, Francisco wondered. The woman looked untidy. Most likely she was homeless. But where did she get a key to the door? Especially a back door key. Francisco remembered that the previous owner had mentioned that he had changed the lock on the front door. But he must have forgotten about the back door. Well, I guess it's time to introduce myself to you, my mysterious guest, Francisco whispered, watching as the stranger cautiously opened the refrigerator and took out a sausage and a small piece of cheese. Apparently, the woman was either not hungry or didn't want to draw attention to herself. Deciding to finally solve this problem, Francisco found some free time in his schedule and headed home. His heart was beating like crazy, even though he knew he wasn't dealing with any supernatural forces, but with an ordinary homeless woman who had somehow gotten the key to the back door. Okay, just be careful. Don't make too much noise, Francisco kept telling himself as he inserted the key into the keyhole. But no matter how hard he tried, the click of the mechanism sounded like a gun bolt. Fortunately, the mysterious guest didn't hear him, so Francisco managed to approach her from behind. The woman stood in the living room, opened an old dresser, and pulled out a stack of old photos. Francisco didn't have the time to throw away the junk left by the previous owner. At that moment, the floorboards under his feet creaked, making the guest shudder in surprise. The elderly woman turned around and looked at the owner of the house. Don't be afraid. I won't hurt you. Francisco was the first to break the silence. I'm sorry. I'm guilty. I'm acting like a thief, sneaking into your house. I'll leave right now. But please don't call the police. But actually, you can call them if you want. It won't be any worse for me anyway, she replied. She looked about 60 years old. But she was untidy, wearing old dirty clothes, so she looked very bad. Please, calm down and take a seat. I'm not going to hurt you. I was just wondering how you got here. The stranger relaxed and cautiously sat down on the edge of the chair. My name is Len. I got here through the back door. The truth is that I used to own this house. I lived here with my husband and my daughter. But then Peter died. My daughter Hope married a local jackass after a while. I begged her not to do it, But she wouldn't listen to me. Francisco found the story interesting. His eyes even sparkled. He introduced himself, and then asked, "And what happened next, Lynn?" She hesitated and wrinkled her eyebrows. "Hope I'm pregnant. But my son-in-law didn't work anywhere. He was constantly drinking and gambling. We never had any money. Soon my grandson Andrew was born. I hoped that my son-in-law would finally get a job, but he didn't care. And then Hope passed away. When she died, Andrew was only a year and a half old. Nick started drinking even more, and then he was deprived of his parental rights. But even that didn't stop him. He kept gambling and got into debt. Eventually, he tricked me and sold our house. Nick sold it while I was in the hospital with Andrew. Did he sell your house? Francisco asked in shock. Yes. He realized his child would become homeless, but he sold the house anyway. That's when my troubles began. We became homeless, and the child welfare authorities took Andrew away from me and sent him to an orphanage. They allowed me to visit him on weekends, but every time I go there, I can hold back the tears. My heart breaks with pain. The previous owner didn't live in this house, so he didn't change anything here, and he didn't even throw our stuff away. That's why I come here from time to time. I swear I didn't steal anything from you. On the contrary, sometimes I even swept up the dry leaves in the yard and mopped the porch floor. And I'm not a bum, it's just that I never buy myself new clothes because I'm saving my pension for Andrew. When he grows up, he'll have some money to pay for college. Lynn's story touched the most painful strings in the young surgeon's soul. It seemed so shocking that Francisco couldn't believe it. I feel like I'm going to die soon, so I don't want to spend the money on myself. But my grandson has his whole life ahead of him. In fact, he's an orphan. I don't even know where Nick is now. Maybe he died or went to prison. Forgive me, Francisco, I was sneaking into your house and taking food from the fridge. The guest continued. Francisco immediately replied, I don't blame you, Lynn. You should have told me right away that you needed help. I would never have refused you. And actually, why don't you stay here? I understand you don't have a place to live. So stay here. The house is big, there's enough room for everyone. At least I'll have someone to talk to in the evening over a cup of tea. You know, I started to think that there were ghosts in my house. A sweet smile immediately appeared on Lynn's face. She clearly liked this idea. She really loved this house. Lynn had never considered herself homeless, but all this time, she had to sleep in basements or shelters. Francisco allocated his guest the room that used to be her bedroom and finally breathed a sigh of relief. Now he knew for sure that he was not going crazy and that there was nothing supernatural in his house. And Lynn seemed to blossom right before his eyes. Now, coming home, Francisco knew that a delicious, hearty dinner and excellent cleanliness would be waiting for him. One day he suggested that Lynn get a full medical checkup, but the woman flatly refused. Francisco, don't waste your time and money. No one can help me. I went to the hospital right before the house was sold. The doctor said the treatment was very expensive. I just don't have the money for it. But it wasn't easy to change Francisco's mind. Eventually, he convinced the woman to go to the hospital. Francisco thought there was something wrong with her diagnosis. Suddenly, it turned out that Francisco was right, Lynn's diagnosis was wrong. It's a good thing that you finally agreed to undergo an examination. Never be too quick to make conclusions. Even though medicine is an exact science, everyone can make mistakes. Tears sparkled in the woman's eyes. Thank you, Francisco. You've given me back my faith in life. Maybe now I'll make it to Andrew's 18th birthday. Francisco smiled. Of course you will. You'll dance at his wedding, too. By the way, since you mentioned Andrew, I have to confess I got a plan. He deliberately didn't reveal the details of the plan so that Lynn wouldn't worry in vain. But the plan was very simple. Francisco decided to adopt a boy, But he couldn't do it alone, because in such cases preference was given to married couples. At some point, this problem seemed insolvable to him. But then his colleague Barry suggested a way out of the situation. Make a sham marriage. You can marry anyone you want, even one of our nurses. You know how much they respect you. No one's gonna say number once you're officially married. You can adopt a boy, and then just act depending on the situation. At first, Barry's idea seemed crazy to Francisco, but when he realized that it was the best way out, he decided to give it a try. He chose Michelle as his fiancée and future fake wife, a young woman from the village who had recently graduated from medical school. She was very sympathetic and never gossiped or gave away other people's secrets. Francisco was grateful to Michelle, who had helped him out in his time of need. It took the young couple about a month to implement all the plans. They finally got married in secrecy and came to the orphanage, bringing all the necessary papers for the adoption. When 6-year-old Andrew stepped outside the gates of the orphanage, his beloved grandmother was already waiting for him, with tears glistening in her eyes. "Hello, my dear boy. I'm so happy I can finally take you home. Grandma, are they my new mom and dad now?" the boy asked excitedly. Francisco and Michelle looked at each other and said in unison, "Yes." At that moment, they didn't know that soon their fake marriage would become a real one. And Lynn still couldn't believe her luck. Not long ago, she was preparing to die in some basement or shelter. But suddenly her life turned into a fairy tale. She had everything she dreamed of and even more. Caring children Francisco and Michelle, beloved grandson Andrew, and a cozy home.